Silence is not empty. That is the greatest misconception of the hearing world. They believe that when the sound is gone, the world becomes a vacuum, a void where nothing exists but the static of a broken connection. They are wrong. Silence is heavy. It has texture. It has weight. It presses against your skin like deep water, and if you pay attention, it screams louder than any siren. I sat in my wheelchair in the corner of the sunroom, a glass box of expensive luxury attached to the side of my son's opulent estate like a tumor. The afternoon sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a golden, silent ballet that only I seemed to appreciate. I am Silas Vance. I am 76 years old. To the world, and specifically to the two people standing 20 feet island, I am a tragedy. I am the former counterintelligence officer who spent 30 years decoding whispers in Cold War bunkers, only to be silenced by a freak construction accident 5 years ago that severed my auditory nerves and left me in a world of absolute, impenetrable quiet. To my son, David, and his wife, Elena, I am furniture. I am an antique that eats their food, occupies their guest wing, and embarrasses them at dinner parties with my loud chewing and my inability to hear their subtle social cues. They moved me in 6 months ago. "To take care of you, Dad," David had said, his lips moving in the slow, exaggerated way people speak to the deaf, as if slowing down time makes the words louder. They think they are warehousing a senile, broken old man. They think my mind went with my hearing. They don't know that when you lose one sense, the others don't just compensate, they evolve. My eyes are sharper than they were at 20. I notice the micro-expressions, the tightening of a jaw, the dilation of a pupil. And I learned to read lips not just to communicate, but to survive. I stared out the window at the bird feeder. A cardinal landed, a flash of brilliant red against the green of the garden. I kept my face impassive, a mask of vacant, elderly boredom. But in the reflection of the glass, a perfect mirror against the darkening backdrop of the trees, I was watching them. David and Elena were standing by the island. They had opened a bottle of wine, my wine, a vintage Bordeaux I had been saving for a special occasion that apparently happened on a Tuesday afternoon without me.
The body language was all wrong. It wasn't a casual drink. It was a negotiation. Elena was gesturing wildly, her manicure nails flashing like talons. She was beautiful in the way a scalpel is beautiful, sharp, cold, and capable of cutting you open before you even feel the pain. She was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my first car. David looked tired. He was leaning against the counter, his shoulders slumped, the posture of a man who has been beaten down by the relentless weight of debt and a wife who demanded a lifestyle he could no longer afford. I knew about the gambling. I knew about the failing investments. I saw the foreclosure notices he thought he had hidden in the trash. He was drowning, and Elena was the stone tied around his ankle. I focused on the reflection. I narrowed my eyes, zooming in on their faces. David said something. I caught the shape of the words. "We can't do that, Elena. It's too risky." My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the erratic rhythm of my angina. It was the sudden, cold shock of adrenaline. Elena grabbed his wrist. Her grip was tight, her knuckles white. She leaned in close to him, her face inches from his. She looked directly at the back of my head. She checked me. She wanted to make sure the old man was still staring at the birds. In the reflection, I saw her lips form the words that stopped my blood in my veins. The enunciation was crisp, perfect for my trained eyes. "He can't hear us, David. Look at him. He's a vegetable. He sits there all day staring at nothing." She paused, taking a sip of the wine, her throat moving as she swallowed. Then she continued, her face twisting into a mask of desperate greed. "The heart medication, the nitroglycerin. I looked it up. If he misses a dose during an attack, it's fatal. But if we swap the pills..." David shook his head, pulling his arm away. "It's mercy," she hissed. I saw the S shape of her tongue behind her teeth. "And it's $10 million. The life insurance policy pays out immediately for natural causes. A heart attack is natural, David. He has them all the time. No autopsy, no investigation." I sat frozen. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. It wasn't just theft. They weren't just planning to forge a check or sell the house. They were planning to kill me. They were discussing the mechanics of my execution while drinking my wine 10 feet away from where I sat. I watched my son. I waited for the outrage.
I waited for the boy I raised, the boy I taught to play baseball, the boy I put through college, to scream. I waited for him to slap her, to throw the wine in her face, to come running over to me and wheel me out of that house. Instead, David looked down at his wineglass. He swirled the red liquid. He looked defeated. He looked weak. He looked up at her and whispered, "Are you sure it won't hurt?" "He won't feel a thing," Elena lied. "It will just be—" The betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. My chest tightened, a phantom pain mimicking the very condition they planned to exploit. My son was agreeing to my murder. He wasn't doing it because he hated me. He was doing it because he was too weak to say no to his wife's greed. He was trading my life for a clean balance sheet. I sat there, staring at the cardinal on the feeder. It took flight, disappearing into the sky. A single tear tracked down my cheek, hot and stinging. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't move. I realized in that moment that silence isn't an empty space. It is a room where the truth screams the loudest, because there is no noise to drown it out. I spent my life protecting this country. I spent decades in the shadows, watching for enemies, decoding threats, ensuring that my family slept safe at night. I fought the monsters in the dark so they could live in the light. And now, at the end of my life, I realized the assassin wasn't a foreign agent. The assassin was sleeping down the hall. If you are listening to this, if you have ever felt invisible in your own home, or if you suspect that the people you love see you as a burden rather than a human being, do not close your eyes. Do not retreat into the silence. Watch them. Look at their lips. Look at their eyes. Subscribe to this channel. Listen to my voice, because I am about to show you how a deaf man heard a murder clot loud and clear, and how I turned their silence into a weapon they never saw coming. I had to know. I had to be sure. I wheeled myself around slowly. The rubber tires made a vibration on the hardwood floor that I felt in my teeth. David and Elena jumped apart. They looked at me with wide, guilty eyes. Elena recovered first. She smoothed her blouse and plastered a bright, fake smile on her face. I looked at them. I let my jaw go slack. I widened my eyes in a pantomime of confusion. I pointed to my chest and rubbed it, grimacing slightly. Then I pointed to the amber pill bottle sitting on the marble counter next to the wine bottle. I was testing them. I was handing them the gun to see if they would pull the trigger. Elena's smile widened. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and dead eyes. She walked over to the counter. She picked up the bottle. "Here you go, Dad," she mouthed, exaggerating the movements like I was an idiot, leaning forward and speaking loudly as if volume would penetrate my deafness. "Your medicine." She handed me the bottle. I took it. The plastic felt cold in my hand. I looked at David. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, his face pale. He knew. He knew what was in this bottle, and he was letting her give it to me. I nodded my thanks. I made a garbled sound of gratitude, playing the part of the helpless invalid. I turned my wheelchair and rolled out of the sunroom. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt their anticipation. They were waiting for me to take a pill. They were waiting for the next time my heart stuttered, knowing that when I reached for salvation, I would find only sugar. I rolled down the hallway to the guest suite. I went inside and closed the door. I locked it. The moment the lock clicked, the act dropped. My spine straightened. The vacuous look vanished from my face, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the man who used to hunt spies in Berlin. My hands trembled, not from age, but from rage, as I dumped the pills onto my desk. They looked identical to my nitroglycerin tablets, small, white, round. Elena had done her homework. She must have found a placebo that matched the shape perfectly. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out my magnifying glass. I inspected one. The scoring on the side was slightly different. The texture was a little too smooth. But visual inspection wasn't enough. I needed proof. I took a penknife and cut a small chip off the tablet. I placed it on my tongue. Nitroglycerin has a distinct biting taste.
It burns. It tastes chemical and sharp. I waited. Sweetness. A cloying, sugary taste spread across my tongue. It was sugar, compressed dextrose, candy. They had already done it. They hadn't just discussed it. They had executed the swap. These weren't pills. They were placebos. If I had an angina attack tonight, which was likely given the stress, and I took one of these, I would die.
My heart would seize, my blood pressure would skyrocket, and I would clutch my chest and die on the floor while they watched and pretended to call 911. I scraped the rest of the powder into a small envelope and taped it shut. Evidence. I sat back in my chair, the reality of my situation crashing down on me. I was trapped. They had taken my cell phone weeks ago. "You keep losing it, Dad," Elena had said. I had no landline in the guest room. I had no car keys. David had sold my Buick a month after I moved in. I was deaf. I was isolated. I was locked in a house with two people who were actively waiting for my heart to stop. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat. I pushed it down. Panic is useless. Panic gets you killed. I needed a plan. I looked around the room. It was a gilded cage. I rolled over to the closet. I reached up to the top shelf, pushing aside the old sweaters and blankets. My hand closed around the cold steel of a small lockbox. They hadn't found this. They had searched my room, I knew because my papers were often rearranged, but they hadn't looked deep enough. They underestimated me. I pulled the box down. I dialed the combination. 197204, the year I met my wife. The leg popped open. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was my service pistol, an M1911. It was clean, oiled, and loaded. Next to it was a spare magazine. I took the gun out. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. It felt like an old friend. I checked the chamber. Loaded. I wasn't going to shoot them. Not unless I had to. Shooting them would be too easy. It would be messy. I would end up in prison. A senile old man who snapped. No. I wanted more than survival. I wanted justice. I wanted to destroy them the way they had tried to destroy me. Completely, publicly, and irreversibly. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Tomorrow was Wednesday, June 14th, David's 40th birthday. I remembered the preparations. The caterers coming in the morning. The tent in the backyard. The guest list. 50 of the city's elite. Business partners. Investors. Friends. A party. The perfect audience. They wanted a show. I would give them a show. I hid the gun under my mattress. I put the bottle of sugar pills back in my pocket. I rolled over to the mirror and looked at myself. I looked old. I looked frail. I looked like a victim. Good. Let them think they have won. Let them think the old man is helpless. Let them drink their wine and plan their vacation to Tuscany with my life insurance money. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't try to walk to the police station. I would attend the party. I would put on my tuxedo. I would sit at the head of the table. And when the time was right, I would make a toast they would never forget. I unlocked the door and wheeled myself back out into the hallway. I rolled toward the kitchen for dinner, ready to eat their food and smile at their lies. I was in enemy territory now, deep behind the lines. But they forgot the most important rule of warfare. Never assume the enemy is deaf just because he isn't speaking. I could hear them perfectly. And tomorrow, the whole world would hear them too. The dining hall of my son's estate was designed to intimidate, a cavernous space of marble and mahogany that echoed with the visual noise of excess. Even without hearing, I could feel the cacophony of the room. The bass from the sound system vibrated through the soles of my dress shoes, traveling up my shins like a low-voltage current. The chandeliers above us dripped with crystal, catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 piercing rainbows that hurt my eyes. The air was thick, suffocatingly heavy with the scent of expensive lilies, flowers that always remind me of funerals, and the savory, greasy aroma of roasting meat. 50 of the city's elite were gathered here to celebrate David's 40th birthday. They were a sea of black tuxedos and glittering jewels, a collection of sharks and peacocks preening for one another.
I sat at the head of the table, positioned like a prop in a stage play. I was dressed in my own tuxedo, one I had bought 20 years ago when I still had a reason to dress up. It hung a little loose on my frame now, a testament to the weight I had lost since moving into this house of whispers. To the guests, I was the frail patriarch, the tragic figure on display to garner sympathy for the grieving son. I saw the way they looked at me. Pity, discomfort, a quick glance, then a hasty retreat to their wine glasses. They saw a broken old man staring into the middle distance. They didn't know that I was reading their conversations from across the room. I saw a man in a gray suit tell his wife that David's credit rating was trash. I saw a woman in emeralds whisper that the house was leveraged to the hilt. Elena was glowing. She moved through the room like a flame, consuming all the oxygen. She was wearing a red dress that was cut too low and cost more than the down payment on my first house. It was blood red.
Fitting. She played the doting daughter-in-law to perfection. She would swoop in, smooth my hair, wipe a non-existent crumb from my chin with a napkin, and smile benevolently for the room. Then she would turn her head slightly to her friend, a woman with a face pulled tight by surgery, and I would read the shape of her lips perfectly. He won't be with us much longer. I watched her laugh. She was already spending the insurance money. She was already picking out the curtains for the house she would buy once my heart stopped beating. David, on the other hand, looked like a man walking to the gallows. He sat 2 seats away from me, drinking scotch as if it were water. His skin was pale, clammy with a sheen of sweat that glittered under the lights. He avoided my gaze. He couldn't look at me. Every time his eyes accidentally brushed mine, he flinched. He saw a walking corpse. He knew that the pills in my pocket, the ones he had watched his wife hand to me yesterday, were sugar. He knew that with every moment that passed, the risk of my heart failing increased. He was waiting for the show. He was waiting for me to clutch my chest, gasp for air, and collapse into the lobster bisque. I waited. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my thumb rubbing the smooth fabric of my trousers. I ate nothing. I drank only water that I had poured myself from the pitcher, refusing the wine the waiters tried to serve me. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I wasn't going to slip away quietly. The dinner service ended. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the room. It was time for the speeches. David stood up. He swayed slightly, catching himself on the edge of the table. He looked around the room, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. He tapped his glass with a spoon. I couldn't hear the ding-ding-ding, but I saw the room fall still. I saw the faces turn toward him. He began to speak. I focused on his mouth. I didn't need to hear his voice to know he was lying. I could see the deception in the tension of his jaw. "Family," he said, his lips forming the word with exaggerated care. "That is what matters most." He looked at Alina. She blew him a kiss. He looked away, sickened. "My father," he continued, gesturing toward me with a trembling hand. "He is a hero, a veteran." He paused to wipe a tear from his eye. The room murmured its approval. "So touching," a woman across the table mouthed. "So sad."
"My father taught me everything I know about honor," David said. "He taught me that a man is defined by his choices." The hypocrisy created a burning sensation in my gut that was hotter than any ulcer. Honor. He dared to speak of honor while he waited for his father to die from a manufactured medical emergency. He dared to speak of sacrifice while he planned to use my death to pay off his gambling debts. I gripped the arms of my wheelchair. The leather creaked under my fingers. It was time. I picked up my heavy silver spoon. I didn't tap the glass gently. I struck it hard, once, twice, 3 times. I felt the vibration travel through the table. I saw the water in my glass ripple. The room froze. David stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Everyone turned to look at the deaf old man at the head of the table, expecting a senile outburst, a confusing ramble, or perhaps a medical emergency. Elena rushed over. I saw the panic flare in her eyes. She reached for my shoulder. "No, Dad," she mouthed, her face twisting into a mask of fake concern. "Sit down. You're tired." She tried to push me back into the chair. Her nails dug into my jacket. I grabbed her wrist. I didn't grab it like an old man. I grabbed it like a soldier,
My grip was iron, fueled by a lifetime of training and a week of pure, distilled rage. I shoved her hand away with a force that made her stumble back in her high heels. I stood up. I didn't struggle to rise. I didn't use the table for support. I stood tall, my spine straightening, the slump of the invalid vanishing like smoke in a strong wind. I drew myself up to my full height of 6'2", looking down at the room. I looked at David. I looked at Elena. And then I spoke. "I may be deaf, Elena," I said. My voice boomed. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel the resonance in my chest. It wasn't the weak, quavering voice of the man they thought they controlled. It was authoritative. It was the voice of the officer who used to interrogate defectors. It was the voice of command. The room gasped. I saw it happen, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the hall. Elena froze, her hand still reaching out, her mouth open in a silent scream of shock. David dropped his glass. I saw it hit the marble floor and shatter, shards of crystal flying outward, splashing amber liquid onto the shoes of the guests.
"You look surprised," I continued, turning my gaze to the room, making eye contact with the bankers, the lawyers, the socialites. "You all think silence is a weakness. You think because I cannot hear your lies, I cannot see your sins. You treat me like a piece of furniture. You talk over me." I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. My fingers closed around the cold plastic of the small flash drive. I pulled it out and held it up. It caught the light of the chandelier. "You forgot what I used to do for a living," I said, looking directly at David. I walked over to the audio-visual station set up near the fireplace. David had prepared a photo montage of his life, a slideshow of his vanity. A waiter was standing there, looking terrified. I handed him the drive. "Play it," I commanded. The waiter hesitated. He looked at David. David was paralyzed, white as a sheet. He looked at Elena. She was shaking her head frantically. "I said, play it," I barked. The waiter, fearing the old man with the eyes of a killer more than he feared his employer, plugged the drive into the laptop. The massive screen above the mantel flickered. The slideshow of David's childhood disappeared. A grainy, black and white image appeared. It was the kitchen, my kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. The angle was high, taken from the hidden camera I had installed in the ventilation grate 3 days ago. It looked down on the marble island. It showed David and Elena standing there, sharing the bottle of wine. There was no sound. The room was deathly silent as 50 people watched the screen. But then the subtitles appeared. I had typed them myself. I had transcribed every movement of their lips, every syllable of their conspiracy. The white text appeared at the bottom of the screen, stark and damning. "Elena. He can't hear us, David. Look at him. He's a vegetable." A murmur went through the crowd. "Elena. The heart medication, the nitroglycerin. If we swap the pills for sugar tablets, the next angina attack kills him." Gasps. Someone dropped a fork. "Elena. It's natural, no autopsy, and the $10 million life insurance policy pays out immediately." On the screen, David looked down. "David, are you sure it won't hurt?" "Elena. It will just be lights out." The video cut. It switched to a new clip. This one was from inside my bedroom. It showed me sitting at my desk. It showed me dumping the pills out.
It showed me crushing one, tasting it, and realizing the truth. It showed me taking my service pistol from the lockbox and hiding it under my mattress. I signaled the waiter to stop the video. The room was silent. It was a heavy, terrified silence, the kind of silence that comes before an execution. I turned back to the table. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope containing the crushed powder of the fake pills. I threw it onto the center of the table. It landed among the flower arrangements. "Sugar," I announced. "Compressed dextrose." My son and his wife replaced my heart medication with candy. David fell to his knees. It wasn't a graceful movement. He crumbled. He put his hands over his face and began to sob, his body heaving. "I'm sorry," he wailed. I could read his lips perfectly. "I'm sorry. She made me do it. We're broke. We're drowning." "You aren't broke," I said, looking down at him with a cold detachment that frightened even me. Elena didn't cry. She calculated. I saw her eyes dart to the French doors leading to the terrace. She hiked up her red dress. She kicked off her heels. She bolted. She ran for the doors, pushing a guest out of the way. "Don't bother, Elena," I said calmly. I didn't chase her. I didn't move. "I learned to read lips in the service," I said to the room. The French doors burst open before she could reach them. It wasn't the caterers. It was Detective Miller. He stepped into the room, flanked by 3 uniformed officers. He was an old friend, a man I had played poker with for 40 years. Miller blocked Elena's path. He looked at her with disgust. "Elena Vance," Miller said. His voice carried through the silent room. 2 officers moved towards David, pulling him up from the floor by his armpits. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was sharp, metallic. Elena started screaming. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was screaming at David. "You idiot! I told you he was watching!" David looked at me. His face was a ruin of tears and snot. He looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he scraped his knee, expecting me to fix it. "Please," he begged. "Please, I'm your son. Don't let them take me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had agreed to let me die in agony so he could keep his country club membership. I raised my hand. I pointed to my ears. I shook my head slowly. I pretended I couldn't hear him. The police dragged him out.
The guest parted like the Red Sea, terrified to be associated with the wreckage. I watched them go. I watched my son disappear into the back of a squad car, the flashing blue lights washing over the dining room walls. Slowly, the guests began to leave. They didn't say goodbye. They scuttled out like cockroaches when the lights turn on, whispering, afraid to look me in the eye. Within 20 minutes, the room was empty. I sat back down at the head of the table. I was alone. The food was cold. The wine was untouched. I picked up my glass of water. My hand was steady. I took a sip. It was cool and clean. I looked around the opulent, empty room. The silence returned, settling over the furniture, over the crystal, over me. But for the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel like a prison. It didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. I watched the last of the police lights fade into the distance through the window. I leaned back in my chair. I closed my eyes. And finally, truly, I relaxed. The house was mine again. The quiet was mine again. And I didn't need to hear a single sound to know that justice had been done.